Hey, good afternoon, children. This is Pastor Dan from Community, and I just wanted to have a little bit of a special time this afternoon where you can learn more about the gospel and more about Christ and what He has done throughout history. And He loves you. We love you here, as we talked about on Sunday. And so we know we can't be together on Wednesday nights right now, and we hope to be back as soon as we can. But for right now, we wanted to do something special. Today, it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Might be raining now. I'm recording this a little bit earlier, but I think it's supposed to rain. So maybe this is a great time for you just to kind of settle in, let Mom and Dad make some dinner for you, and just be able to relax and hear about Christ and sing some songs. And so we're going to be going through a story. It's called The Biggest Story. And really, it's taking all of the Bible and bringing it down to about a 25-minute story. We're going to split that up between today and Wednesday afternoon and Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock leading up to Easter. And so we want you to start understanding all of the Bible stories that you have heard, how they all work together, that God had a plan for all of them. And so God is doing an incredible thing in our lives, in this world, and He wants to redeem us. He wants to buy us back from the sin that has come into our lives through the curse. And so we are going to be going through this video that really is a video about a book. And the book is called The Biggest Story. And I'd encourage parents, if you're watching, if you get this book, it's on Amazon. It's a great book that really just takes our children through the gospel and shares with them how they can know Jesus and what He's done and what the Old Testament and the New Testament have in common and why God had the Old Testament and all of those questions that you might have. And we're going to do half of this book through the 5th chapter today, and then we're going to do the other half on Friday. And then on Easter, we'll have a special Easter time for you children as well. And so here we go.
You guys stomp your feet like that? Now let's clap together. That's it. Keep it going. Let's sing this little light of mine.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
All right, keep clapping now. Sounds good? Everywhere I go.
Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine.
Yes,
Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Oh, that sounds so good. That's called clapping on the backbeat. All right, sing this real quiet with me now.
Even when I'm afraid, I'm gonna let it shine. Even when I'm afraid, I'm gonna let it shine.
Yes, even when
I'm afraid, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Chapter 1. Once upon a time, there lived a man and a woman. They were the happiest people on the planet. True, they were the only people on the planet, but they were still terrifically happy. Their names were Adam and Eve. And God made them. He made them in His image, little mirrors to reflect God's glory. And like everything else God made, He made them good. It was a wonderful time to be God's children in God's wonderful world. Unfortunately, things didn't stay happy and wonderful for long. On one very bad day, Adam ate from the only tree God had declared off limits. Adam failed. It was a terrible day, the second worst day in the history of the world. A snake had tricked Adam and Eve and told them a lie about the fruit. He said they would be like God if they ate it. But actually, the opposite was true. When they ate the fruit, they found themselves far away from God. They had disobeyed God's word and believed the lie of that devilish snake instead of the truth. Being near to God and having Him draw near to us would not be easy any longer. God was not happy with Adam and Eve. He wasn't happy with the snake either. God put a curse on the man and the woman and the snake and everything else. He kicked Adam and Eve out of the garden paradise He had made for them. It wasn't possible for a people who were so bad to live with a God who is so good. They had to go. But before they left, God made a promise. He promised that the evil serpent, the devil, would always be at war with Eve and her children. Now that doesn't sound like a very nice promise, that bad guys and good guys would fight all the time. Who wants to be in a war that never ends? But here's where the good part of the promise comes in. God promised that one of Eve's children would someday, eventually, sooner or later, crush the head of that nasty snake. Nobody knew when or how, but she would have a child to put things right. Chapter 2. Sadly, things got a lot worse before they got any better. Adam and Eve had several kids, including 2 brothers named Cain and Abel. Abel trusted God, but Cain did not. And when God accepted Abel's gift and not Cain's, Cain got very angry. So angry, so hurt, and so jealous that he killed his brother. It was the first murder in history, but it wouldn't be the last. Things were not the way they were supposed to be. Everything fell apart after sin entered the world. Things got so bad so fast that God decided to start over. The people on the earth were terribly wicked in their hearts. All the time, every day, non-stop. They didn't deserve to enjoy God's world anymore. So God took it from them. Or more exactly, He took them from it. He sent a flood that wiped away everyone and everything because it had all been stained with sin. Well, almost everything. God saved one family on the earth. One family that trusted Him and believed what He said. Noah and his wife and their sons and their wives were spared. They lived for a lot of days with a lot of animals in a big boat called an ark. It rained and rained. God was going to start over with His creation. He was angry with the world that hated Him. But He was still at work to save the world that He loved. That's why He rescued Noah and his family. God wanted to give His people another shot. God was going to start over with a new world, and Noah was going to be a new kind of Adam. The problem was that Noah was too much like the first Adam. It didn't take long after they got out of the boat for Noah to do some pretty bad stuff himself. He trusted God enough to build an ark when everyone laughed at him, but it turns out he could be just as foul as everybody else. Even one of Noah's sons got cursed, just like everything got cursed back in the garden. History was repeating itself. Whether it was Adam or Noah, the first world in the beginning or the second world after the flood, people just couldn't get things right. One time, a whole bunch of people got together to build a giant tower. They thought they could build all the way up to heaven, but it must not have been all that big because God had to come down just to see it. And when God saw it, he was not pleased. Everyone was working together, which was okay, but they weren't working for God, and that was not okay. They were trying to show how smart and impressive they could be all on their own. They thought they didn't need God. So God mixed up all their languages and scattered the people all over the place. Things were still not going well in the world God had made. Thankfully, God was still not done saving his people. Chapter 3. Not too long after the whole tower business, God called a man named Abraham to leave his home and go to a new country. Actually, his name was Abram at this point, but everyone remembers him as Abraham. When God called Abraham, he made a lot of big promises. He promised to bless Abraham and to bless everyone who blessed Abraham. He promised to curse everyone who cursed Abraham. He promised Abraham a land and a child. God promised that Abraham would be the father of a great nation and that all nations would be blessed through him. Pretty much all the blessing that God wanted to give Adam and Eve, he promised to Abraham. And the best part? This time God was going to do everything himself to make sure Abraham got his blessing. You might think that God wanted to bless Abraham because he was such a swell guy. But Abraham didn't know God at all when God called him. And even after he got the call and all these promises, Abraham could still be a liar and a bit of a scaredy cat. Abraham's life had a lot of ups and downs, but he had two things going for him. The only two things, it turns out, that really matter. God's promise to bless him and Abraham's belief in God's promise. That's all Abraham had, which was a good deal because it was all he needed. At times, it looked as if God wasn't going to keep his promises to Abraham. For one thing, it was about 100 years before Abraham and his wife Sarah, who used to be called Sarai, had a baby named Isaac, who thankfully was always called Isaac. And then when the baby grew into a boy, God told Abraham to kill him. That must have seemed like a not-so-funny way to make a great nation out of Abraham. But Abraham listened to God anyway. And at the last second, God gave Abraham a ram to sacrifice instead of his beloved son. It was God's way of saying, I'll take care of the rescuing. Just trust me. Eventually, Isaac grew up, got married, and had some kids of his own. Twins, to be exact, Esau and Jacob. God picked Jacob to get the blessing, even though he was the younger brother and wasn't supposed to get the blessing. But God is God, so he gets to pick. Jacob had 12 sons, and this time it was the fourth son, Judah, who wound up with the best blessing. Jacob told Judah that a lion of a leader would come from his family. Great blessings, but not so great people. Isaac was sort of a weakling. Jacob was a selfish trickster. And Judah did such dumb stuff we don't even want to talk about it. And yet again and again, God kept his promises all the same. He blessed the whole lot of them despite themselves. Maybe the snake crusher would still come from the gnarled branches of the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob family tree. Chapter 4. Several hundred years after God's promise to Abraham, it looked like things had gotten way off track. When God told Abraham to leave his home, he promised to give him a new land in Canaan. It was going to be a great land. It was supposed to remind God's people of the garden they once had. It would be sweet and refreshing with plenty of milk and honey. But Abraham and his sons never really possessed the land they were promised. And now it was 400 years later and they were slaves in Egypt. How Abraham's family got to Egypt is a long story, but here's the short version. They went to Egypt because there was a famine in Canaan. And when they got to Egypt, Jacob's sons found their long-lost brother Joseph, who helped get them food and a place to live, even though he was there because his 10 older brothers had been jealous and sold him into slavery after they almost killed him because of his fancy coat. I told you it was a long story. Well, delivering them from famine was one thing. That's when Israel's family was still pretty small. Israel, by the way, was Jacob's new name. I guess everyone needed 2 names back then. But hundreds of years later, the family was huge. How would God save a couple million people from slavery? It's not like he could just turn the Nile River into blood and send frogs and gnats and flies and disease and boils and hail and locusts and darkness and death until the king of Egypt let them go. Actually, it's exactly what God did. God raised up Moses to deliver his people, but in reality, God did all the work. He sent the plagues. He led the people with fire and cloud. He made the sea turn to dry land so the Israelites could walk through. And he turned the dry land back to sea when the Egyptians tried to cross over. It seemed that no matter what the Israelites did or what everyone else did to them, God always found a way to save his people. Chapter 5. It was a very good thing God was always rescuing his people, because it seemed that no matter how many times God saved his people, the Israelites were never quite safe from themselves. See, after God delivered his people from Egypt, he gave them a lot of commandments. This wasn't to punish them, but to help them and protect them. They were good commandments. And if they obeyed the commandments, God's people would be blessed. There would be food and children and long life and protection and a new home. It would be just like they were in paradise again. That's where God wanted to lead them all along. Back to the garden. As you might have guessed, the people didn't do so well obeying God's commands. And after Moses and his helper Joshua died, they disobeyed even more. They ignored the most important commands, and when they did work hard at some rules, like getting their sacrifices right, they didn't really obey those rules from the heart. They just checked them off their list and forgot about the most important commands. Not that God's people deserved it, but God finally gave them their promised land. God did the work to get them in, but God's people didn't do the work to drive everyone else out. This caused a lot of trouble for the Israelites. They constantly had enemies to fight, and worse, they constantly had to fight the temptation to be just like their enemies. Sometimes things would go well for Israel, when they had a good leader and when they obeyed. But most often things went poorly. God gave the Israelites rules, but they didn't follow them. God made his dwelling among them, but they didn't act like they wanted him to stick around. God sent prophets, but Israel didn't listen. God provided priests, but the priests didn't know how to be holy. Later, God gave them kings. The kings were a royal pain. Israel was a mess. Of course, God still had his promises to keep. But most days it was hard to imagine how anyone could save this stubborn people. It would have been even harder to imagine how the promised man could come from among this people.
sing, and make music with the heavens. We will sing, sing, sing. Grateful that you hear us when we shout your praise. Lift high the name of Jesus. Sing, 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 and make music with the heavens. We will sing, sing, sing. Grateful that you hear us when we shout your praise. Lift high the name of Jesus. Sing, sing, sing. Oh, we will sing, sing, sing.
Welcome back. I trust you enjoyed the story. I trust you enjoyed the singing. I know you've probably missed singing with other believers about Christ and just some of those great songs that you get to sing on Wednesday nights and in Sunday school as well as in church together. And so we want to just bring some of that back into your house where you can sing throughout the week. Again, be back Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, we'll be starting the stream of the new video, and that will finish up the story of who Jesus is and why he came to earth. And Jesus is the answer to all of our problems, to all of our issues. Jesus is the answer. And so that's the one thing I want you to remember today, that through the Old Testament, we saw how much man struggles, how much man needs someone and something else because he can't live the way he's supposed to on his own. So man needs Jesus. And we're going to see that next time. And this is going to be a great thing for us as we lead up to Easter and remember about Jesus' resurrection. Again, parents, the book, The Biggest Story, I don't get any royalties from this. It's just a great book that we've used with our family. The great pictures and a great story. It's written by Kevin DeYoung and it's illustrated by another person. But pick it up. You can get it on Amazon, Lifeway, wherever it might be. I'd really encourage you to do that. It's a great maybe Bible time with your children. All right, we'll see you guys Friday, and you have a good night.